My father was a school teacher, my mother was a homemaker. I lived in a two-parent home. We traveled during the summers. I had a well-rounded childhood, but at the same time, I lived in a dysfunctional home. And when you live in a dysfunctional home, you don't realize it. On the outside, it looked great, but in home, we suffered verbal abuse, physical abuse. My dad would beat me, as a child. And, I just thought that became to be natural. So it took me, to become an adult to actually realize, I lived in a dysfunctional home. And, my marriage was rocky because of the stuff I had gone through and seen in my own household. I was reincarnating what my dad was, and I tried hard as hell not to. About 1980, I'm working at General Motors. My wife is pregnant with my son, my second child, and I get a call from my wife, and she said, "You need to go up to your parents' house right away." So I jump in the car and drive, 2 or 3 miles over to mom and dad's house, and when I get there, the street is like pandemonium. The street is full of police cars and ambulances, there's crowds around, and I didn't know why. Come to discover, my mom is sitting in the back of a police cruiser. And what's going on? So the police pulled me to the side. They determined I was the elder son. They told me, said, "Well, your mom shot your dad." At that time, I was stuck with the dilemma of keeping my mom out of prison and burying my dad at the same time. Kept my mom out of jail. She never had to go to jail. So I was glad of that. I didn't want my mother to go to prison. I never, ever had one iota of anger toward her about that. I understood, because I lived in the household. And as I look back, I can see my life from that point took a spiral. I was going to school at the time. I was in college because I was on the General Motors pre-apprenticeship program. I had a pregnant wife, and we were arguing and fighting. I had, a house full of, relatives. My mom and my 2 younger brothers and sisters were living there. I got to make sure they get to school every day and make sure mom is okay. And I'm in college, and I'm working a full-time job at General Motors. And so it was just too much. So I started abusing drugs. I started abusing women. I just started abusing everything in my life. My dad was killed on July 25th, 1980. And in 5 years to the day, July 25th, I walked into prison, serving a 50-year sentence for a crime I did not do. I was convicted of assault with intent to commit murder. It involved a Flint police officer. He got wounded in the arm, and I wasn't even at the scene when he got wounded. When the prosecutor came to me with a plea deal, I'm like, "Are you kidding? The police officer already testified I didn't." In his statement, his report of the day of the incident said, I didn't shoot at him. However, at the time of trial, he changed his whole testimony on the stand. I knew I was wrongly convicted. I said, they got me dead wrong this time, but I'm stuck in prison, in a maximum security prison in Michigan. I have 4 children, a son and 3 daughters. And on Father's Day, 2001, I had called him that morning. Hey, my son says, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to pick the girls up. We all going to come visit you." So 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock come, no visit. So around 4 o'clock, I start making phone calls, trying to say, well, I couldn't catch my son. I couldn't catch my daughter. I couldn't connect with anyone. So I ended up calling my ex-mother-in-law. I said, "Mom, have you seen the kids and what's going on?" She said, "You haven't heard?" I said, "No, what's going on?" She said, "Little Ronnie's been shot and killed. They're all at the hospital. A 14-year-old boy shot and killed my son in Flint, Michigan." And first, can you imagine losing a child under any circumstances? Now, add on top of that, being in prison. I had been in prison 15 or 16 years. I had been leader of various organizations inside the prison, religious organizations, civic and prisoner organizations. And so I had done a lot of counseling with people coming to me with their trauma and their grief. So when it came to my turn, I had to do it to myself. And I forgave the kid. I advocated to the court that he be treated as a juvenile. He was a 14-year-old juvenile. And it took some finagling because the prosecutors wanted to charge him as an adult. In Michigan, they give juveniles life without parole for murder. And I did not want to see that child in prison for the rest of his life without having a second chance. It was not going to bring my son back. It was not going to do anything to tear his family apart and further erode our community. He did 7 years in the juvenile system. He had done well enough there where they agreed not to charge him once he got to 21, and he was released. And once you're in prison, you either sink or swim. And I'm not much of a sinker, so I learned how to swim. And I became a paralegal. I fought other people's cases. I worked for an organization called Prison Legal Services of Michigan, where we did criminal appeals for guys, and I helped get other people out and eventually got my own self out. And it took the courts, 27 years to agree, oh yeah, this was inadmissible, this was wrong, you were done wrong, we're gonna let you go. I'm not an angry man. I am I am more thankful and more grateful for my life at this point. The things I have now are the things that I prayed for while I was in prison. I had read a book by Dr. Naeem Akbar called Visions for Black Men. I was in prison for 5 years at the time, because it took me 5 years to work that initial anger off. You know, you do prison in stages, and my first stage out was angry. But I read that book, Visions for Black Men. It's a 90-page paperback, a small but powerful book. And reading that book was a turning point in my life for me. I stopped looking at myself and started looking at others. I became an advocate because I saw, you know, when I started being angry and I looked up, I saw the depravity going on in prisons. I saw the unfairness. I saw so many good people that had made bad choices and weren't going to be getting a second chance in life. You know, who doesn't want a second chance? Who doesn't deserve a second chance? You know, a child isn't born with hatred on his heart. A child isn't born knowing that I'm black and he's white, or you know, these racial divisions or these religious divisions or any of these superficial divisions that we use to divide ourselves, because there's only one race. It's the human race. Why can't we just treat each other as humans? And when I did that, it's like the whole world changed. When I quit concentrating on me and concentrating on serving humanity, things happened for me that I could never dream of. You know, sitting here is a perfect example of that.